I've muted everyone. Please, please keep your microphones on mute when you're not speaking.
It's awfully quiet in here. Does anybody have a joke?
I was wondering that, like, there's something problem with my speaker or something.
3 block producers go into a bar. Have we open sourced the punchline for that yet, from when it was first proposed?
No. Did you see the block
shot at me?
They purchased Rickroll B1? I think that's pretty funny. Rickrolled B1 and B1 are the 2 accounts that B1 owns now.
All I know is that Rick is a great name. So,
have you been rolling B1 recently?
No.
Igor, you had a haircut.
Igor is such a baby now.
I noticed it as well.
Well, I think we have a nomination for the youngest person on the call there.
Mini Josh on there.
Josh has a baby.
I'm just trying to beat Hubert last week from Seoul. He had his little girl.
Igor, new haircut?
Yeah.
Welcome everyone.
Don't have him get it anymore.
My goodness, they'll let anybody on these calls, won't they?
Hey, George, what's his name?
So, are we ready to come to order?
I think we're good. We're good to go.
Who is the host today?
I will take care of hosting. Liquid
It's being recorded yet.
I'm sorry.
Start recording.
Yeah.
Need to start recording. Whoever's hosting the call.
I don't see the record button going yet.
Yeah. Just launched it. Thank you for the reminder. As per usual, we will start with the roll call, which Liquid EOS has accepted to take care of. They've also accepted to take care of the note-taking, which is greatly appreciated. I don't know if you guys saw their last notes, but they were pretty good. I would please ask every BPs to write down their attendance for the chat. Need to check. Things have been shuffling around. So I guess we're ready to start up with first agenda item, which has been proposed by Luke Stokes from EOS DAC. The floor is yours, Luke.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I did link to the document where we can discuss this. It's kind of a lengthy document, so I don't really want to reread the whole thing. But essentially, I made an argument that it's difficult for us to spend all this effort on who should have access to this call and all this stuff if we don't define what the purpose of the call is. And to me, that is still undefined. And as an example, we had like a BP traditions that we came up with. We had a whole call about who should host the, based on the ranking, who should host the call, who should do minutes for the call, all these other kind of things. But then we didn't actually do that. We kind of just did whatever after that. So it's just a little confusing to me to have all these different block producers come on a call and not have clarity on why we're meeting. If it's not related directly to our job as block producers to create blocks on the blockchain, independently, as my understanding of DPoS, and I'm glad we have Mr. Dan Larimer on the call because he can correct me if I'm not understanding DPoS, but my understanding is it's supposed to be independent entities that make decisions on chain, and those decisions are based on the voters that support them. And when I see a lot of just block producers talking to each other and coming up to agreements, it just seems a little odd to me. And I see a lot of the discussions up to the point on calls like this being a lot more of that and less of like engaging with actual voters and coming up with what the voters want. So I just think over time, I could see these calls becoming something we don't want as far as representing delegated proof of stake and how we as independent block producers secure the chain according to the will of the voters. So unless we, for me anyway, personally, unless we can clarify what this call is about and why we need it, I'm a little concerned about it, just even for the integrity of delegated proof of stake and supporting our voters. So
I would, can I make a statement?
Absolutely.
What I see right now is there's a lot of new people that are new to EOS. Everyone's learning the ropes. So the primary purpose for these calls should be to educate and to get feedback and deal with issues that come up that impact the network. Right now, there's if there's new bug fixes for patching the system contract, and there's any questions about those should be discussed here. If there's security concerns, those should be discussed here. And to some extent, if there's questions about governance or those issues, this is a good place to do that. I agree that these calls should not create a tight group of a committee that's steering everything that happens on EOS. The purpose of the block producers should not be to set policy, but rather to fix things and make sure things are running. To make sure that, hey, everyone's still alive, that we can still reach you, we know who you are, so that when something does go wrong, we have those relationships. But sometimes just having a scheduled time to meet, which is already factored into everyone's schedule, can also facilitate more efficient communication of problems, so we don't have to repeat ourselves or lose things in telephone. So I'd like to not be on the entire call. So if we could take a moment to schedule this call to answer, I want to answer a couple things about RAM and other concerns real quick, and then leave you guys to the rest of your agenda, if that's okay.
Yeah, let's do it.
That sounds great.
Works.
All right. So the questions that people have that I've been seeing are, is RAM too expensive? How are developers supposed to build on the platform when it costs so much? Should the producers be increasing the RAM supply? What about insider trading and all those things? So here's there are a lot of factors. And the number one thing that everyone needs to understand is it's not just the producers that have to provide the RAM. It's all full nodes. So it's a network-wide decision. It's not just, are you guys ready to increase your RAM? Okay. There's some software testing that should probably be done on a test network that actually uses large quantities of RAM to find out what happens with the shared memory architecture. And there's all kinds of weird things that can start happening with operating systems with that quantity of RAM and memory map files, because this is not an area that's typically tested very frequently. And so there's lots of caveats and things we need to pay attention to, particularly as it relates to developer machines. It gets more and more expensive for us to test and debug a global network if we have to replay a blockchain with huge amounts of RAM. As a general philosophy, I don't think it's a good idea to use fractional reserves, because at any time there could be a bank run. At any time, a hacker could decide, hey, I'm just going to actually fill all my RAM I have with garbage data. Now I'm going to call your bluff on whether or not you actually have it. So the producers should always stand, in all full nodes, should always stand ready to utilize all the RAM that can be purchased and allocated. And if they're not, then those nodes should be prepared to go down if someone actually tries to use the RAM that we've reserved for them, or they've requested to be reserved for them. So with respect to preventing insider trading, I believe that we should update the system contract to automatically increase the RAM supply at a fixed percentage per year. That should cause it to grow approximately with Moore's Law and all the other things. I'm thinking that around 20% a year from its current state would allow us to stay on the economical end of the spectrum for the foreseeable future. That would not be a hard long-term commitment, but as the current system contract says, the producers collectively can set the RAM however they want, but it can only ever increase. We should be cautious to increase it because there's no takebacks when we decrease it. We also want to avoid sudden shocks to the market. So, doubling the RAM overnight would have significant impact on the pricing algorithm and the Bancor, and so that should also be avoided. What does that mean? That means that the speculators out there are pricing RAM not based on just what we have today, but they're factoring in future growth as well, because they know that when that new RAM comes on the market, it's going to decrease supply. It means that creating an account will be expensive. RAM is a scarce resource. And the reason it's scarce is because of technological limits of computers. And the way that we get the high throughput that we get on EOS is because everything is kept in RAM. If we hit random pauses to go to disk to fetch things, our throughput would drop from thousands of transactions a second to hundreds or less transactions per second. I think a big part of Ethereum's performance hit is because they don't necessarily keep everything in RAM in many implementations. So, we can have this trade-off. We can't have both RAM and performance, or large amounts of storage and large amounts of performance. They kind of fight each other at some point, and so we have to decide where we want to be on that curve. But the good news is, even if an account costs $40, if you do 10 transactions, we're still cheaper than Ethereum. So that's one thing. Now, we don't want things to be expensive. We want to lower the cost for developers. And so a part of scaling is to actually increase the resources available, but to do so in a way that is intelligent for long-term growth. So side chains will be the primary way for increasing. Each new side chain that's operated by a same group of producers can use the EOS token, and all the EOS accounts can be migrated over to the side chain as well. So you have one account across all side chains, and each side chain will have its own RAM market for RAM on that chain. And once we get there, then we can really start to scale horizontally with the RAM and not be put up against the hardware limits of the system. And so Block 1's building the infrastructure tools necessary to do the efficient interchain communication. It won't require any hard forks of EOS, or at least bugs aside, in order to implement that feature, which means that the RAM supply will grow dramatically in the next 2 years as more and more side chains pop up, as people realize the benefits of operating dApps that don't need tight integration with everything else on their own side chain rather than on the main chain. So that's the laundry list of things I can think of off the top of my head. Are there any questions?
Daniel, what's the ETA for the intra-blockchain communication implementation?
I haven't actually spec'd that out. We've been primarily focused on making things more usable and eliminating bugs and patching security issues the past little bit. So we don't have a exact timeline on that, but I'd say this year.
Do you have a prototype that makes it like certain? Because I know a lot of other blockchains are working on that. I met up with Aeon and Cosmos, and they're working on that, right? It's their challenge. I would love to see if we can compete.
All right, so we've got the complete design. We know exactly how to do it. The things that need to be built are an index on the Merkle tree so we can efficiently generate the proofs that need to be mapped from one place to the other, and a smart contract that can validate the proofs. I did a blog post where we did a proof of concept proof and validation from an earlier version. We've since enhanced it quite a bit, simplified it a bit, and with so we have two things in the pipeline that are going to make inter-blockchain communication more efficient. One of them is the BFT messages. Those will allow the finality time on EOS to go from like 3 minutes down to 1 or 2 seconds, and will require basically additional network traffic between the producers. Those messages will need to be logged and then used to generate efficient inter-blockchain communication proofs. So there's a number of those pieces that we've designed. We know exactly how they work. We just postponed them until after 1.0 came out. So that's kind of the order. So we'll have BFT finality first with accelerated BFT finality. Then we'll have the IBC that's super efficient, using the low latency BFT data to make concise proofs to the sidechains.
As that relates to the price of RAM, because we don't have that option right now to support the network, do you recommend we do kind of an initial maybe chunk of RAM, say 32 gigs or something like that, and then get on a scheduled, increase per week or something like that?
The market's already pricing in the future supply of RAM. The only thing that increasing in a bulk like that is it's like dumping on the market. You're going to get a lower price than it probably is worth, which is going to be less efficient for the blockchain and everyone else. You want to trickle it on the market, kind of like the EOS token distribution, where we did a little bit every day, to maximize the value that the blockchain extracts for the resources it's making available. Also to minimize price shocks. You want time for people to discover what the price should be, and you want to distribute the new RAM at a fair market price, not at a bulk discount, because then all the profits will just go to the speculators who have money available now to buy up all that new supply you dump on the market. And the end result is the price will end up exactly more or less where it is today. So trying to control the price today is short-term thinking. Trying to grow the supply and have a sustainable growth model is long-term thinking. The market will balance it out. There are all kinds of dApps. Right now, EOS is the cheapest platform, even if it's $100 per account for anyone who wants to do lots of transactions, because it's $4 a transaction on ETH. I saw when I looked it up earlier today. So the 25 transaction pays for a $100 account, and then you have basically unlimited transactions. Most of the applications, whether you're an exchange or a token or whatnot, don't actually need that much RAM on a per user basis. So I think it's good to encourage developers to be conservative with their RAM at this stage. High prices do that. Trying to artificially lower RAM prices causes developers to build dApps today that won't be sustainable in the long term. Because if I build a dApp that's expecting RAM to be one price, and that's fine if I'm the only dApp on the network, but as soon as the real usage grows, the price is going to get back up to where it is now. That's what the speculators are predicting, right? And then the dApp that, even without any speculators on the market, those dApps won't be viable in the long run. And so what the speculators are doing is they're informing us about future demand for this resource. And dApps need to adapt to that reality until we can create software solutions, side chains, and other techniques to scale RAM.
Related to that, do you currently see this as a natural monopoly, essentially? Because I think for price discovery, for me, I want to have other things to compare it to, and I think the Ethereum comparison that you've been giving is really helpful for me. I've been waiting for something that we can rationally look at and say, this is a range that we can expect the speculators are thinking about. And I agree with you. I don't want to be the RAM fed. I don't want to control this in any way, shape, or form. But I do want to have a rational defense when someone says, I'm leaving, I'm going somewhere else, I'm taking my ball and I'm going home because it's too expensive here, and we potentially might lose great opportunities as a network. And I know that the token holders will be frustrated if they feel we had action we could have taken to keep those people within the EOS community. So what I'm hearing is we need to do our best job of looking at the marketplace to see what other options are out there, and then finding a range that is rational, that we can defend to our token holders to say, this is what we feel speculators are looking at. Here's the argument. You've given some great arguments today already. $100 accounts, $40 RAM, that kind of stuff. I can say, okay, great. Now I can go back to the token holder and say, this is the reason why we're making this decision, and we feel it's rational, and it's being defended by the speculators and the price that they're setting. I'm a little concerned in that we are so different than anything else on the market, other than, Steam is free transactions, but what else is there, right? Nothing else, and Steam can't do smart contracts. So, and we don't have side chains, so we're in this like almost non-natural monopoly is my concern. And without guidance from people who have experience like yourself, it's very difficult for us to defend our decisions to our token holders of why we have an increased RAM when we have the capacity to do so. So I think maybe if Block 1 might come out with some expectations of, here's how we think the RAM markets should work. They're working as we thought they should. We don't think they're broken. We think that, just as you said, that the price is being discovered by those who are making these future decisions. That would be really helpful for us as block producers to educate our token holders for why we're making the decisions we're making. So thank you.
Yeah, I think going to a growing RAM at 20% per year, based upon expectation of Moore's law and everything else, to keep it in a relatively safe zone, with the ability to slow that rate in the future if technology doesn't keep up, but with the intent of increasing supply via side chains. We're looking at options for storing some data on disk and paying with extra CPU time, which will lower the throughput in terms of transactions per second. We're considering those things, but I think the sidechain approach is probably the right approach for, because that allows us to scale both RAM and throughput instead of just trading one for the other.
I had a question about what happens if there's enough RAM being utilized all of a sudden by a hacker. So let's say we have 64 gigs and a node is only, 7 nodes are only running 32, and then an extra 40 gigs get written all of a sudden. Is it just that the lib will stop to advance? What are the repercussions?
Well, it really depends upon transaction throughput. If you've got a fast SSD drive or some of the new Intel NVM or whatever storage, you might be able to just page it to disk and keep on chugging. And the end result will be that when you produce, if you have a cache miss, you're going to bill people more CPU time for the same transaction compared to another producer, which means you'll probably get voted out because you're costing people some of their throughput whenever your transactions are on there. So I would strongly recommend that all producers be prepared for someone to call their bluff on whether or not they actually have that RAM.
Hey guys.
Hello.
Hey.
Hey Dan. I was
actually, making I made a promise at the last call to come on this time after I kind of take a deeper look at what's happening with the RAM. I was not as informed in the last call, but I took a look at that, and I think there is a room to consider, and maybe I would say a completion of this mechanism that is currently being proposed, which means that what I mean is that we can build, use it in such a way that block producers are essentially using the relay. I mean, what it is basically is a token relay. That's the RAM contract. And token relay allows people to use their EOS to buy RAM. But on the other hand, it can allow block producers to use RAM to convert it to EOS. So while users will convert EOS to RAM, block producers that has increased their capacity jointly and agreed would in fact be converting the RAM into EOS. And that could have a very interesting effect, because I think that one of the problems that we're currently seeing is that speculators are doing an important job, but they do create a situation in this specific case that because we don't want to use fractional reserve, they do create a situation where people will just buy it in order to, profit when other people need it. Now, when you have a dynamic where the price is constant, everything being equal, it's decreasing. Let's say no one buying, no one selling. As RAM is added relatively and EOS is taken from the contract, the price will always decrease, the price per RAM. That kind of encourage more buying by people that really needs that, because they don't care that the price decreases in time. It's the speculator that cares about that. So they will still speculate, but maybe we can see less hyper speculation where you speculate that other people will speculate. And some of them will speculate that the app builders would pay whatever because there's so much money here, and they'll just spit it out and pay for that, and they could make profit. So
okay, let me see if I can say what you've said in a way that all right. So bottom line is, if the block producers, I'm not going to say the block producers, if the system contract were to conjure RAM out of existence, sell it onto the market, then you have fractional reserves. If
they, let's take an hypothetical, let's say we all upgrade to 128. Let's say we do that in a month, and then we say we're gonna sell this additional 64K within the next 6 months, every day or every hour. And as we sell this RAM to the relay, we actually get EOS in return.
That's exactly what's going on right now.
It's the other way around that goes right now. It's that's what's going on right now when you return RAM, of course, when you return. But this would make it work when you essentially, create RAM, not just return it, not just
yeah. That's how when we increase the RAM and when we update it to grow at 20% or whatever the community decides, then what we'll be doing is we'll be creating new RAM out of nothing and selling it into the relay, and then that's how we actually increase the supply of RAM, and how it gets baked into the market is the producers allocate it and it goes in the relay, and the price of the relay falls automatically. That's exactly what's going to happen when we launch it. But that's dumping another 32 gigs in there, just going to get absorbed by current speculators, because they've already, I put on my speculator hat. I know where the technology is. If I just buy RAM, assuming there's 2 terabytes out there, total supply, and that's my basis for buying RAM, then it doesn't matter how much we dump on the market, it's a fair price because we can't dump more than they're planning on. It's like, all right, so there's this big pool of funds that the producers can release at some schedule. All right, I'm prepared for it. That's what I would be doing as a speculator. So the only thing that we can do to bring down the cost of RAM is to increase the supply to infinity, or as close to infinity as possible, by adding side chains, making it so that as soon as it's profitable to launch a new side chain, and I think that this is what the RAM prices will do, launch a new side chain, you're basically have a whole new pool of RAM you get to sell off, and that's going to be very, very profitable to the blockchain and the producers. So as RAM prices increase, new chains get launched until it's not profitable to launch new chains anymore. And that's how things will scale. And so the market will balance the supply demand, which will lower the cost. But then it's going to be, each chain is going to be like a different city. It's going to be like real estate. Well, it's valued by your proximity to the other contracts that are on the same chain. But for a lot of things, say Monster EOS, all right, do I care if that's on the same exact chain as whatever the Bancor stuff's doing, or whatever the CryptoKitties or the Wizards thing? Do they need to be on the same chain? Likely not, if I can easily move tokens from chain to chain, and I've got an economy between it. So the only things that will need to be on one chain, and the high-value apps, they'll cause that chain's resources to grow because people want to be close to it. But most apps will probably find, well, I'm going to go where the land's cheap out in the country instead of in the city. That's going to be the difference in RAM prices on different networks.
Yeah, so just to make sure that I kind of understand correctly, what you're basically saying is that whenever new RAM is offered, whether it's additional RAM on the main net or new RAM on a side chain, it would be sold, sold to the users by the block producers.
Yes.
So that creates a very strong incentive for block producers to add RAM, because they're basically selling, and speculators actually create a situation where the RAM prices are in the sky. Then if you look at the prices right now, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's like, I don't know, like 100 million, or I mean some
20 cents a kilobyte, 22 cents a kilobyte.
Yeah, but if you kind of take the whole market value, it's like the market cap of RAM is like close to 100 or so, $100 million. So essentially, if you sell additional 64 gigabyte in the market right now at the current price, you're gonna get $100 million to split between block producers. It's insane when you think about it as an incentive.
The block producers are being paid by the EOS token holders with the inflation. And so if they're using the same EOS token, the same EOS account, then it's really the EOS token holders that are benefiting. And the EOS token price goes up, which means producer pay goes up. And everyone benefits when you do that, versus producers going and creating their own chain. You maximize the network effect when you have the same 21 producing with the same accounts with efficient cross-chain trading between all the chains. That will make, there's huge market incentives to get the side chains and scalability going, created by the RAM price.
Yeah, so I just want to stress that point, and to to see how how we can implement this mechanism to start kind of adding something. I don't know if it's even possible in the near future, but to start adding some pressure, some downward pressure in the price. I think that would do good for application developers.
Once we update the system contract. I don't think we need a constitutional amendment to update the system contract because producers collectively can set it anytime they want. We'd just be automating it for them so that it grows at a fixed percentage per year. That should be sustainable long term. That removes the need for you guys to make decisions on a day-to-day basis that could impact the price, and then eliminates all worries about perceptions of insider trading or anything else that goes on. So makes nice, predictable. It's kind of like the Bitcoin halving. It's the exact same kind of thing. So that will cause there to be slow supply growth on one chain with the plan to go multi-chain as soon as we can get the technology and infrastructure there. And so speculators today need to speculate not just on the demand on one chain, but the impact those future side chains will have on the on where people want to put their apps and where they want to consume RAM. And so speculators are already factoring all that in. You don't look at the 64 gigs of RAM that we have today. That's not what speculators are pricing it on. They're probably pricing it on 1 terabyte to 2 terabytes as the actual supply of RAM because they know it's going to get there. But supply demand is what it is. It's going to set the price, factoring in more variables than any one of us could conceive of. And so I would strongly encourage everyone to resist the urge to manipulate the price lower simply because developers are crying about the price. Instead, we should focus on building technical solutions to actually increase the supply at a rate that we can actually sustain. And as we do that, the price will come down naturally.
We encourage the developer to sell their RAM of some overhaulers to sell their RAM. And do you think solutions that way? Do you think there is the good solutions that way allow trading users for trading their RAM instead of just trading with EOS system?
So I couldn't hear that. It was kind of fuzzy.
He was asking about trading directly between accounts rather than to and from the system contract.
Trading to and from the system contract prevents it from being a token or a security or any of those other things. It's just buying, acquiring, and releasing resources according to an algorithm. And you can effect a transfer from one account to the other with a 1% fee by having them buy and sell simultaneously with the market maker. If we allowed transfers between them, then it would allow people to bypass the internal market maker. And that in turn would, right now this market maker is generating more income for the blockchain than is being paid to producers. And so it could completely offset inflation and or make EOS deflationary as RAM trading grows. And so from that perspective, it's working wonders. Making it transferable would undermine that.
Just curious about the 1% fee. Yeah. Just curious why we set it to 1% trading.
You were breaking up there, but I think the question is why a 1% trading fee?
Yes. Yeah.
It's actually 0.5% when selling and 0.5% when buying. So if you sell and buy, it's 1%, but it's and that's very close to what actual exchanges are charging on their trading fees. So the idea was to set the fee as high as possible so that it doesn't, but lower enough that it's not competitive to create an alternative order book.
Dan, I had a question about IBC there. I'm wondering how many side chains you think can be attached to one mainnet. Like when we're looking at the block history that needs to be on-chain and the RAM use of these things. So how many networks can be attached to one there, you think?
Well, it really comes down to the frequency of communication. If I only communicate from one chain to the other once a day, then I can have basically unlimited number. If I'm transacting with another chain every single minute, then every IBC message is like 10 internal messages. So if we can do 1,000 transactions per second, we can do 100 IBC messages per second.
Saturating the network, though.
Saturating the network.
And do we need to keep the block history in each of these contracts that are paired with another chain? The full history in RAM?
No, you keep
block history does not need to be kept in RAM.
Yeah, it's you're just keeping
all
the
you need
hash.
to keep in RAM is exponential back off. So the most recent block, 2 blocks back, 4 blocks back, 8 blocks back, and so on. You have a Merkle root, and each block header is a Merkle root of all other blocks. And so when you generate a proof, you link from that block to a previous block and then down into an action within that. So your proofs can be defined for any block from just the head block.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
I would just like to clarify something going back to what Eyal was talking about from Bancor. It sounded like, and Eyal, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that you were describing that when block producers introduce RAM into the market, there would actually be an incentive going towards them. And Dan, I think, glazed over that point in that there's actually no direct incentive. The incentive is only through EOS tokens growing in value. But Eyal, I think, was talking about an actual incentive in tokens going back towards block producers. So I think there might have been a disconnect in the discussion. But
the RAM resources are a collective commodity. The EOS token holders are the ones that have to bear the cost of replicating this data across all the machines. So it's not right for the producers to receive the profits from adding the RAM, because they're not the ones that are actually bearing the cost of it. Instead, it's the community that gets the RAM, because every time someone buys RAM, EOS is taken out of the market and stored in the EOSIO.RAM account, and it just starts growing there. And so that's why we want to trickle it in there, is to make sure we accumulate as much as possible in the EOSIO.RAM account.
The kind of reasoning behind that accumulation and this mechanism is not clear to me. I mean, I'd love to kind of understand it better.
Producers aren't the ones that, every full node has the RAM. The producers aren't adding RAM to the network. They're just the ones that are gatekeeping sort of the consensus process of when the network is capable of having more RAM. But the RAM is not being added by them. It's not their RAM that people are using. It's everyone's RAM that people are using. And that's why the cost of a sticker RAM has nothing to do with the cost of RAM on here. Because there's hundreds or thousands, maybe tens of thousands of full nodes out there. So it's 10,000 times the cost of a sticker RAM is the true cost of adding RAM to the network. And so the proceeds from adding that RAM should not go to the people who have the ability to set the flag. Oh, okay, now we have more. It's not their RAM to sell.
I understand. And what about perhaps even thinking about burning the EOS?
Well, the RAM that comes in funds the market maker for people who want to sell RAM later. You can't burn it, but if people never sell it, then it's directly off the market. The fees associated with trading, that can be burned, and that accumulates in the EOSIO.RAM fee account.
I have to disagree on that point, because I think that, let's say I would sell it, and after I sold my RAM, I got the EOS, and let's say I burned it. Let's say it was the block producer that has to bear the cost, and he would sell the RAM, and then he would burn it, and that would actually benefit the entire community if he does so. So if you look at at RAM as a resource of the community, burning EOS when you add more would do great thing to first decrease the prices of the RAM, discourage over speculation, and essentially benefit the community for bearing higher RAM burden.
But we don't own the RAM. We don't have RAM as block producers. Some other people bought it, right?
Yeah.
They could sell it and burn.
What he's talking about is in the market maker for the Bancor, we're accumulating a pile of EOS, and there's a pile of unallocated RAM. And it's constantly moving funds back and forth. And if you take the EOS out, then what you're really doing is saying that less EOS is equal to the same RAM, and you're lowering the price of RAM. What's that going to do? It's going to cause the RAM consumption to increase. Okay, so the price of RAM falls. But the consumption, the RAM is still just as scarce as it was before.
The ratio between speculation and consumption can change. That's my point. The ratio between unused, unneeded RAM that bought purely for speculation to the actual RAM that application needs, that ratio, because if you have an ever decreasing price of RAM, you really want to release it as soon as you can. And that's kind of, it creates different dynamic in the markets, and I think it can change the ratio dramatically, and also again offset inflation in a very powerful way. So I wasn't aware to the node kind of requirement, and that's why.
So what we're saying here is, assuming supply and demand's constant, if I buy RAM today and I sell it tomorrow and nothing changed, I get my money back. That's a zero fee network, except for the trading fee. If I buy RAM today and then over time the price at which the blockchain will buy it back from you falls, I won't be able to sell it to the market maker as much in the future. That means it actually costs me something for holding the RAM, and that's effectively charging rent. That's the rental model of RAM rather than the ownership model of RAM. And the rental model of RAM could actually be a very lucrative model. So it's kind of like a property tax mindset. It's like, oh, I'll sell it to you for $100 today, and next year I'll buy it back from you for $50. And the difference is your rent. That's a very efficient way of implementing RAM rental. And if you just sit on the RAM and basically rent to own, right? If you never sell, then you can hold the RAM forever. And eventually when you are done, you don't get anything because you held it for 10 years. And the price that the market's willing to pay to get your RAM back is now very low. The issue we have there is there's also no incentive to release RAM. If the price of RAM is falling, I've locked up RAM. Why in the world would I go through the extra effort of, say, reusing an account or freeing up tokens or uninstalling contracts I'm not using anymore if there's the financial incentive dwindles over time? So
I think that is, if you know that the price would be going up, you would probably keep it. But if you know that the price is like, it kind of naturally goes down unless, applications are coming in. And again, I can see a level of speculation here of people believing
there's two things. Speculators will get rid of it, but people that are actually consuming it won't. And we want people that are consuming it to get rid of it by freeing the RAM that they were using so they can sell it. So say I create an app and I create a bunch of monsters. Right? Those monsters 10 years from now, no one's collecting them anymore. They're using a bunch of RAM. I can't get anything for the RAM. I'm not going to bother freeing it up, and that RAM's just wasted because we've basically said that I suppose there's offsetting RAM. So if demand outstrips the rate at which we're collecting rent, then that's reasonable. So there's a proposal here, and I think the proposal goes something like this. charge a 5% annual tax on RAM, which is realized by transferring out of the EOSIO.RAM account into the RAM fee account, a percentage of that every so often, which would cause, everything else being equal, the price that the bank core algorithm allocates for RAM to fall over time. But if there's more demand, it can still go up. So I think a small thing like that might will certainly generate revenue for the network, but it won't. I think have a small impact on the price instantaneously.
I think that we have parameters that is somehow under the mutual control of the the block producer and the greater community, which is the rate in which the RAM supply increases. I mean, there's a very big difference between 10% or 20% or 30% every year. So I think there could be, I would say, a balancing factor or a balancing phase with that. But I think the right, I would think that the starting point is that you are actually starting by a 1-to-1 ratio. So when you add RAM to the system, to the contract, gradually you actually, you burn EOS at the exact value of the RAM that you added. So starting with like but you know.
And you sell in and you take the EOS that you get from selling the RAM into the contract and you burn it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. That sounds like a great way of implementing it.
Just to confirm with you then, for the regard to the sidechain, does it require the 2021 block producer to be the same as the mainnet?
Could someone who heard that repeat that? The connection wasn't very good.
So regarding to the sidechain, does it require the 2021 BP to be the same as the mainnet?
Sidechain can operate in two different modes. One, the same block producers. Two, independent block producers. If you have independent block producers, you have to ask them how they're going to get paid. The mainnet block producers are already being paid with inflation on the mainnet to add it, and so they can use the same tokens. They can stake the same EOS. They can use the same EOS to buy RAM on the sidechain. That all works very well for growing EOS token value. But if you just want to create your own chain, you can create your own token, and you can sidechain to the main chain, and you don't even have to get permission from anyone.
Regarding to the IBC, so which mode you're regarding to? So first step or the step?
Both.
Okay. The second question is for typical sidechain, does it require the 15% of block to really activate?
That's a per chain parameter. The purpose of the 15% threshold was so that people could vote on different constitutions and different configurations and producer sets. But since you guys all cooperated to create one chain, we never got to have any real need for the 15% because there was already more or less pre-agreement on what it should be. But no, that's not a technical requirement. That was more of a doing the first referendum.
Great. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a question. If you would consider that a lot of people don't like EOS, how much money is involved in having this RAM price go up? So is this a mechanism to make EOS, as long as there's no sidechain capability, almost unusable?
I'm going to say no, it's not unusable anymore. It's by far the most usable chain. If you're using Ethereum and you receive one transaction and you send one transaction, you create an account for that, it's going to cost you $8. So if you want to compare like transaction fee for doing getting onto a chain, doing end transactions, and then exiting, EOS quickly becomes the cheapest, most cost-effective chain out there. This is just a very valuable commodity. These are like the Teslas of blockchains, and we're trying to figure out how to build cheaper electric cars. Well, blockchains start out with the premium products and then work their way down to the consumer smart car kind of products. So the prices that we're seeing here are not a problem at all for the high impact, high value cases that don't need a lot of RAM. Those being exchanges, prediction markets, auctions, identity, those types of applications are very high value and can easily afford the RAM.
Yes, but the high volume, low value, they would look at EOS and say, oh, this is pretty expensive.
Expensive compared to what? It's the cheapest on the market.
Yeah.
Ethereum transaction processing yesterday and Saturday was going at around 24 hours to 26 hours. That's how long it took you to get a transaction confirmed.
And paying $4 for it.
Yeah, and so, but basically, I'm not sure what you're comparing it to at this point.
No, but is it possible that external factors drive the price up just to make the perception of a very expensive chain?
I can't speak for what speculators or people with money are doing. It's not intentional on our part.
Okay.
Matthew. Hi guys, I actually have a question. Is it possible in the future that we use worker proposal fund to help with account creation on the network? Is that a sustainable model, or?
That's basically giving RAM away for free. You know, EOS comes out of printing presses, goes and buys the RAM and gives it to someone. That's just another way around it. If you want to make accounts free, offer a product that, like if I'm building an exchange, I know that for each customer on that exchange, I can expect to make however many $100 per customer. I'd easily pay $20 for a customer who opens an account with a minimum deposit. And plus, once I have one account, I don't need to pay for whole new accounts. I just need to pay the incremental cost of storage for that user, which if they're doing something like an exchange app could be very, very low. So the account creation cost, I don't believe, should be subsidized in this particular manner, particularly because of Sybil attacks. How do you know that you're not just giving free accounts to people, to the same person? You need to solve the identity problem before you can attempt to start offering and budgeting for free accounts for people.
Great, thanks.
I just want to add, I think for the developers, you'd have to be making RAM optimized applications. So an example, the EOS IO forum is highly RAM optimized. It has no RAM storage. Even Monster EOS is under 1 megabyte. I think last time I checked was like 300 kilobytes worth of RAM. So I think developers on EOS just have to build RAM optimized applications. And I think that just could be the name of the game.
For example, take something like Steemit. Steemit doesn't have a RAM market, but nevertheless it had to be designed to be RAM optimized. What does that mean? It means it only keeps track of your votes for 1 week, after which your votes are discarded, which means per user, the most you need to store is however many votes that user can make in a week. So a user can have a relatively small amount. All the other algorithms, you got a couple global variables in there. But you can build very robust applications with a very low per user RAM usage by not keeping things. Like we don't store the RAM, logged content in the memory. That's not what you do. In fact, unless you're going to read the data later at a future point in your contract, it probably shouldn't be in RAM.
Thank you, Dan, for this. I guess it was very insightful. The whole community appreciates you coming here and answering most of our questions.
Yeah.
Anyone have any last question?
Yeah, just one final question. What is the timeline on the system contract? How quickly can we get that?
What part of it?
20% increase.
Oh. There are a number of things that I'd like to consider with the system contract at the same time. I'd like to add a new name auction for names that are between 6 and 11 characters in length, one every 10 minutes rather than one per day for those. Because between 6 and 11 characters, they're not very good for extensions. So people will probably want them at one per day. You're never going to get those names, so those names are basically inaccessible to the network right now. But this way, they could monetize it. So we want to do a few of these things. Now, that particular change would require a referendum. So I'd like to roll in several of these types of updates as part of the next referendum so that they can all be approved at once by the community. Feature changes are supposed to require referendums. We're not just supposed to meet here in a call, make a decision, and then it is so. So I'd like you guys to be very aware of that. Unless it's a bug fix, or in line with the previously established intention as documented by the Ricardian contract, you should only update the system contract in response to a community referendum.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Actually, I would like to take a moment to talk about the proposed constitution. I'm guessing that's another hot topic with you guys. All right. The goal of blockchains is to reach global consensus, which means that they need to be almost as objective as possible, and to avoid a lot of governance level decisions being in the hands of a small group of people. The more decisions that are in the hands of a small group of people, the more problems there are, the more likely that it's be viewed as a security versus a community effort. So we want to really minimize the types of decisions that the block producers are making to be very objective as possible. And in fact, that's why basically we had the DAO type hacks where the code didn't function as it was intended and people lose a lot of money. In reality, the way that these things should happen is the app should have its own governance process for how it updates itself, and the block producers will never have to get involved. The only time block producers should really be involved is if the nature of the bug locks the person out of their account. And we know who their rightful owner is. And it's just a matter of patching the code to allow them back into their account. Or if it's a community system contract, EOSIO token, multi-sig, EOSIO contracts, those contracts you guys can freeze and update because you are in charge. And if other people would like you guys to have power over recovering or updating their code, they can put you as the owner or as one of the owners on the account. But of course, app developers should probably check with the producers in the community first, so they just don't put work on your shoulder to maintain things that you don't want to. But the goal is to minimize the amount of work and the nature of the decisions you all have to make. It's really, really nice that we have a small number of cases right now where it's relatively objective who the rightful owners of various tokens are. But at the end of the day, we need to have some kind of standard. And the purpose of writing smart contracts is to formalize our processes. So if we wanted to implement a dispute resolution and arbitration and all those, the process for that should be encoded in the smart contract. The consequences, the decision makers, should be encoded in the smart contract. What I do not want is for the to have it implicitly be that the block producers own everything and can do anything in order to satisfy any arbitration order. That was way too much power, entirely too subjective, impossible to tell. And then, the liability issues it creates for everyone involved are quite large. So under the proposed constitution, your role would be to freeze and update the system contract when we identify bugs. You've been doing a good job of that so far. And when there's a DAO type situation and an app developer screws up their own internal governance, then you can step in, but only to the extent of replacing the code with one or more different fixes and to evaluate which fix most conforms to the intent of the original code, potentially causing that code to operate, to restore and fix state according to what it should have been initially, not just change the code so it works that way forward, but basically approving the patch, not writing the patch, not determining what the patch should be. That should be coming from the community. It's just, oh, we're going to deploy it. We're going to freeze it until they can figure out how to deploy it. But generally speaking, good apps should not be requesting that. And I think you guys have the right to demand compensation for the time it takes for you to evaluate and exercise your power to update those contracts and to set the fees. So if you wanted to have some kind of policy for how much it charges to have you review, to freeze an account, and then to update the code on the account, you should have some kind of like hourly rate or per instance case that discourages people from relying on you, because it should be expensive to exercise the Supreme Court of smart contract behavior, which is effectively what you guys are. It's a Supreme Court of 21 parties whose job it is to execute contracts according to the intent of the parties, as expressed in code and recording contract for when code is insufficient.
So Dan, can you clarify? Do you think it's a good idea that we release all the accounts that were blacklisted right now?
Until a referendum passes, the current constitution is in effect.
So precisely, we'd keep the frozen accounts because ECAP requested it?
It's your job to determine whether or not ECAP's request was valid and you want to freeze the accounts. You don't know if the new constitution will pass referendum. So I'm not going to tell you what to do in this situation. But I think it was always my intention that the producers collectively, as they're the ones that are elected directly and have trust of the token holders, should exercise their own discretion when it comes to these things.
I'm really glad you brought that topic up, Dan, because we've been talking to some people who wanted to build on the EOS blockchain and they were not feeling confident building on it anymore after the arbitration cases. So I think it's a really important topic and I hope we can all fix that constitution.
I think the sentiment I've seen is there's a lot of support for the new constitution. I would like to see ECAF implemented as an app that people can opt into.
from that point of view, in terms of the existing constitution is in place, do we need that whole 120-day window referendum and everything in place in order to even change the constitution? Or are we looking at this as fixing the intent of the original design that Block 1 gave up to the block producers to run on the mainnet?
Your guys' chain, you figure out whether this is an interim constitution that we have right now. If you have a referendum and people vote on it and it gets the votes and it sustains the votes, then it should be ratified. There's no code changes required for a constitution change. So you don't have like the multiple windows of implementation and so on. But as soon as you have 30 days with 15% of staked vote approving a particular, and at least a 10% spread between yeses and nos, then according to the current constitution, the new one should be in effect. You don't need to wait 120 days, you just need to wait for 30 consecutive days. That's my understanding of the current constitution.
Cool, thank you.
Look, there's no reason why we couldn't, for example, have a question which actually is to vote between Constitution, the interim Constitution, version 2, and in theory other proposals as well, and none of the above, which is, I think, something that Daniel and I and a few others had talked about in another group. So that may be the best way forwards. But of course, again, the big question we therefore have is who decides that?
There should not be one ballot with multiple options. There should be n independent referendums, and if ever any of them get to the threshold, they become effective. If you have two going in parallel and they both get to the threshold, or the second one to get to the threshold, override is the most recent one to get to the threshold. So you just put them all out there, use approval voting on it versus some kind of sequential. No one should be the gatekeeper on what should be a referendum. However, I do think that there should be some kind of fee associated with some of these referendums. Maybe it's not necessary. Maybe just because referendums are so difficult to introduce and pass.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Great. Anything else on the? Is there anything else on that on the Constitution? We can move on. Excellent.